Okay, I need to say something right off the bat here. I started this outline a few weeks ago, but I'm filming it and finishing it a couple weeks after Dave Smith, the founder of Sequential Circuits, passed away. So much of what I love does not exist without his ideas, and myself and millions of other musicians are the benefactors of his innovation every single day. Put plainly, music does not sound the same. Musicians do not make it the same way without Dave Smith, and I'm grateful for what he gave us and wish the best for his family. Okay, on to the video. Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear. This is the Take 5. It is a 5-voice analog polysynth from the big brains at Sequential Circuits. I've spent just about 6 months with it now. I did a video on my first impressions with the promise of a complete review a little bit later, and here it is. I don't know that I'll keep doing 2 videos for each synth I want to talk about like this, but I digress. One of the ways I got to know it well, I recreated all of the original Prophet 5 patches. You can watch that video if you want. It's been my only on-stage synthesizer for my last few gigs, 3 different groups with pretty varied sounds, and the Take 5 was a good fit for all of them. And just on paper, a Sequential Circuits polyphonic synthesizer with the Prophet 5 filter and a flexible modern architecture around it at half the price of a Prophet 6 or a third the price of the Prophet 5, I really thought the Take 5 was going to be a massively popular synthesizer, but it doesn't seem to be nearly as popular as I expected it to be. And I knew I wanted to talk about that. Why isn't this so popular? But I was having trouble finding a good structure. I didn't have an angle that fit, that could guide my outline. So I asked in a community post, and right away, you guys had great questions. So thanks as always, my subs and my viewers, for helping me find structure. I'm logging on to do my part. My contribution, my way of trying to make the Take 5 more popular is talking about it, to show you what it's been for me, touch on all the reasons I like it, and show you really what it can do. I'll step through all the sound design options, highlight some of the most useful design elements, and show off a lot of the sounds I've used it to make. There are chapters below, so you can skip around only to the parts you care about. Don't watch anything you don't care about. And hopefully, if I do my job, by the end, you'll be pulling up Reverb to check use prices yourself, and I've got affiliate links down below for you to do that. Sound good to you? Sounds good to me. Let's start by moving to the table, talk about what the Take 5 really is. Oh, and this video has no mid-roll ads, thanks to a short mention from our sponsor, Skillshare. What is it? We have 44 keys to play our 5 analog voices. On a Fatar keybed with velocity and aftertouch. It really does feel premium, it really does feel good. The sort of core of our sound design is in all these gray sections in the middle of the keyboard. Where to start other than the oscillators? They blend smoothly between a sine to a saw to a square, and then pulse width all the way down to 0 or 100%. Something I mentioned already in the first impressions, but I want to say it again, because I think it highlights some really impressive and thoughtful design features. There are a few values for each of the exact waveforms where it'll stay right on it. Does that make sense? So as I smoothly move between these, there are several values that are just a sawtooth. There are several values that are just the 50-50 square. There are several values that are just this beginning here, the sine wave. So if you're trying to dial in something specific, you don't have to be really, really careful. You don't have to be using an oscilloscope. You just need to get close, and you can hear it when it stops, when it's about there. Love that. You get the full benefits of a continuous knob, and the issue of not having any, value on screen or any oscilloscope feedback to land on the exact wave shape is totally solved by that. Anyway, we have 2 continuous waveform oscillators, not just one. Get them both on the sawtooth, and you can feel they're pretty stable already, right? Detune a bit. In the mixer section, we also have white noise to the right and pig noise to the left, and an on-panel control for oscillator 2 to 1 FM. Awesome. We also have, and I'll turn off oscillator 2 so we can hear it. We have a sub-oscillator seeded from oscillator 1. There's it on its own. It is 1 octave down from oscillator 1. It is a square. Definitely beefs it up. And with oscillator 2, we're already pretty big. Excellent. I was playing with the filter knob a lot, wasn't I? On the filter section, we have one big-ass knob. I cannot tell you how much I like that. It's such a simple thing. It is for sure the knob we're going to interact with the most, so I'm glad it's gigantic. And, of course, we have resonance. I'm going to go back down to just our sawtooth so we can hear things clearer. We, of course, have our big-ass cutoff knob, and we have resonance. That can be self-oscillating. It's not tracking now, but we can set it up in our program controls here. Keyboard to low-pass frequency. Which is nice, but we already have sine wave on our oscillators. And we have our drive knob. We turn it up just a little bit. Let's give it some more things to chew on. See him. You guys hear that? I got a little squeak in my filter knob. I might have to lubricate that. I've been cranking it too much. Before we move on from the filter, I know what you guys want to hear. This is indeed the exact same filter chip as the Prophet 5. This is the SSI 2140, the modern reproduction of the SSM 2040. That would be the filter in the Prophet 5 revisions 1 and 2. They didn't have to put it in here. They could have kept those chips in only the Prophet 5 and let it be legendary, but they've included it, and that is exactly what many people would cite as one of the most important parts of the Prophet 5 sound. Does that mean there's identical gain staging in this before or after the filter? No, of course not. But a massive part of what defines the character of the Prophet 5, especially what people are going to cite as an important part of the sound of the Prophet 5, it's in here. And I think that's quite cool. Okay, while we're talking about chips, I guess, the oscillators are the SSI 2130, and that explains how we have an analog sine wave. They have an analog sine wave converter as part of that chip package. I'm not 100% sure on anything else that uses those, especially not sequential stuff. I don't think any other sequential stuff uses it. I'm of the opinion that your oscillator chip doesn't necessarily define a lot of your sound. The implementation of it and the controls afforded to you do, though. So instead of giving us simultaneous waveforms on switches, which is possible, they could have done, we have continuous waveforms. That's what makes these sound the way they do, the controls they gave us. And I think the controls they gave us are cool. I like having a sine wave. But I would also like a triangle here in the middle. But I do recognize that without giving us that, we can have pretty fine control of what is on here, and it saves all the real estate of a separate knob for pulse width or separate switches for the different waveforms. Plus, having a sine wave is unique among the analog sequential stuff, so I'm happy it's here. Just because I didn't mention it yet, you have 5 potential octaves for each of your oscillators, centered around the pitch defined on your keyboard that you can transpose here. And it doesn't change. While you're holding your note, it just moves the MIDI notes for the next time you press. That is the way I like it to be. You have glide and unison, of course. Unison will stack your voices. You can decide how many. Let's do all 5. And we can, of course, unison detune. That is in the program settings. Unison detune, here it is. Great. Right above that is the vintage knob. Just like on the Prophet 5 reissues, let's do just one oscillator. Hit it with full vintage just to hear it. It introduces parametric variance, I guess, between different voices. So if I just press one note, you hear it behaving a little differently on each key press. I don't have velocity on. I don't have anything else modulating it. But you hear it slightly different pitches, slightly different envelope movement. The idea is simulating different components drifting out of spec on an old instrument, but in its implementation, it makes things sound a little more alive. And I like that it's here. Again, that's another feature that is on the Prophet 5, and later it was on the Prophet 6 and the OB6 on a much less expensive keyboard. You guys can probably already really tell where I'm going, can't you? Okay, moving on to the envelopes. There's not a ton to say. I believe they're digital, which is good. That means we have more control. The amount control for envelope 1, which is on your filter by default, is a bipolar control. So to the left is negative contribution, to the right is positive contribution. There is a detent in the middle. Envelope 2, which is by default on your amplifier. You guys know what that sounds like. Less release, but full amount. With just these buttons, we can make them velocity sensitive. And then your max velocity is where your amount knob is at. And your minimum velocity is 0. Actually, let's get these both to just decay envelopes, more or less, so we can hear it. And how about just on the filter? There you are. I like how quick and easy that is, and we can control the amount pretty easily from there as well. Okay, we also have additional envelope routings. So by default, amp and filter. We can also go to filter and amp are generated from envelope 2, and envelope 1 is free for us to point somewhere else. So if we just have envelope 2 as filter and the amp, the amount is just how much we're controlling the cutoff. And you get full range of the amp, which I like. We can also set it to filter and gate. So the amp is just gated on and off with our key press, and the envelope controls just our filter. This lets us have an envelope free to modulate something else with, or an auxiliary envelope, and we have different behavior between our filter and our amp. I like that. I would love gate plus release, but I know that's asking quite a lot. Okay, what might we want to do with that auxiliary envelope? Well, let me set this up. I have now... Here's a pretty simple synth sound, and with this auxiliary envelope, what can we do? Well, we can use our modulation matrix. The mod matrix lets us route control signals to any modulatable parameter, which is quite a lot on the synth. There's tons of them. So if I scroll down, the first few things we see are already set up for us. Aftertouch, which is pressure, adds 42 or whatever amount to the cutoff, and the mod wheel adds an amount to whatever we're doing at LFO1. But if we move down to our third row here, we can set up sources and destinations. I want to use our envelope 1, which we just discussed is currently set up to be an auxiliary envelope. And we want it to control, let's go just to oscillator 1. Let's turn it way, way down. Classic brass sound with that little sort of jump of pitch right at the beginning. We could send that wherever we wanted, of course. Wonderful. And other things we can do with the mod matrix, we can set up any source to any destination. Well, what if I want LFO1 to control the filter? Instead of clicking through to pick these things, we can hold source assign and then move a parameter. And you see I moved frequency over here, and it just found LFO1. What do I want? Whoops. What if I want my destination to be the cutoff? Hold that, move the cutoff. How much? Change up the value. LFOs are digital, they can go in audio rate. Or quite close to it. So if I jang this back down to 0, all the way down at the bottom of the mod matrix are default rows just always for the LFOs. And you can't change the source. So LFO1 currently goes to oscillator 1 fine tune. And you see this amount knob is just controlling that row of the mod matrix. But we also get a little bit, let's go just to oscillator 1 here. We also get a little bit when I move up the mod wheel. Well, like we saw earlier, that is handled right here in the matrix as well. So a lot of the stuff you might do with a single knob to route modulation on a lot of other synthesizers, it's all happening within here. Great, there are monophonic and polyphonic sources. I won't go too into detail about that, but monophonic is the same for every voice. Polyphonic can be different per voice. LFO1 is global. So every voice has the same value at a given time. And here in LFO2, which I also have on cutoff right now, it is per voice. So that you can have a different value for each of our 5 voices. Can you hear that? Back to LFO1. Kind of makes sense. So this is just like your envelopes can be different per voice. And this is one value towards everything. I like that we have the option for this. I also wish I could just click LFO2 to be global as well. You can get kind of close by resetting them all at the same time and then turning off reset, but I don't know if that persists through patch load. Anyway, we have monophonic and polyphonic sources. So LFO1 is a monophonic source, cutoff is a polyphonic destination. So if we use LFO2, a polyphonic source with cutoff, a polyphonic destination, it can be different for each voice. And there are plenty of sources that are polyphonic: noise, the oscillators, voice spread, which is a value evenly spread across 1 through 5 for each of the 5 voices. Pitch bend and mod wheel are monophonic, they're one control. You guys get it. There are some monophonic sources and some polyphonic sources. Other destinations are everything about the oscillators, everything about the filter, everything about the mixer. Panning, so individual voices can be panned, the envelope parameters, the LFO parameters, and here, reverb and the effects. So we can control our effects section through our mod matrix. Because yes, we have built-in effects. So I am on the very first patch in my Prophet 5 recreations. The top effect can be delays or modulation effects, a high-pass filter or distortion. I like all the delays. Let's change all these parameters. That's our straight-up digital delay. I find myself using this Bucket Brigade delay, or one of the tapes. A lot more often. I think they sound good. There's a second tape. I find myself using tape 2 the most. Yes, the delays are great, but I don't really like most of the modulation effects. I think the chorus can be usable. I think the flanger and the phaser are kind of cheesy. At all times, that's actually... That's about as much as I've ever liked the phaser, which is to say not very much. I think an exact line from my first impressions was it sounds more phase 90 than small stone, which is not my type of a phaser. Moving on. The high-pass filter is useful because it's the effects section, it's monophonic, but you can get some cool patches from that. There's a distortion. Which I do actually like a ton. Great. Ring mod. The ring mod I do like. I wish the time could go a little slower so I could just use it as a tremolo. Because that is where I would use it more often than not. Rotating speaker like a Leslie sound. Which, right now, I'm finding out that I kind of like as well. But there you go. I use the delays all the time, constantly. I think they're actually quite good. Everything else, take it or leave it. But I like that they're here. And our second effect is always a reverb. I believe it's technically a plate, but we have these controls that let us get sort of close to halls rooms as well. I think springs are kind of hard. But pre-delay is how long before the first reflection. Decay, how long it takes the sound to die out. And dampening is sort of how much energy is bounced around for a given reflection. You hear low dampening has a shorter decay than high dampening. You absorb more of the energy with lower dampening. And our tone control to the right is a high pass, and to the left is a low pass. I normally have it just barely into the low pass, but you can do either. Again, I quite like the reverb as well. Wonderful. Great. I think that's most of our sound generation. Before I get too far away from it, we have an arpeggiator, which you can hold with this button here, and relatch. We have a knob to control. How many times a given note repeats. Which I think is pretty cool. We can change this octave right away. And you see our mode option right here. We have up, and down, random, and the order we pressed our keys in. I like that. We have a step sequencer, which you just type in notes, and rests, and ties. And then I hit play. And it is polyphonic. You hear I pressed one polyphonic note I didn't really plan to. And what happens when you play the keyboard while the sequencer is going? You can play along with it, which I think is wonderful. And those are related to our master clock. Those are all related to our master clock, which we can sync our LFOs to and some of our effects as well. All wonderful. That's most of our sound generation stuff. Before we talk about what I think it's really, really good at and show you some sounds I like to use, let me tell you about our sponsor. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes that cover just as many different topics. It's a great place to learn new skills or grow the ones you've already got. For me and you, us music making folk, there are classes on different DAWs, synthesis, working in specific genres. All are taught with structure and purpose without any ads, so you can focus on learning. I, myself, have been looking for a keyboard theory class that can fit with the self-taught knowledge I have, the sort of punky garage, method of learning an instrument. Just try it until it sounds good, learn the songs you want to learn. But the first class that's built in a way that works with that knowledge, I've been enjoying. His name's Mark from PGN Piano. And he has a course, and the title is just 24 plus hours of piano lessons, homework, and tests. But in the actual class, he calls it the Living Room Piano Course, which I like. It's very fitting because it does feel like you're hanging out with somebody who's teaching you all these concepts. And who could have guessed that's a style that works for me? I'm sure you guys can believe that. But there are plenty of other classes and plenty of other topics. I'm sure there's something for you. And if you think Skillshare would be interesting to you, the first 1,000 people that use the link in the description can get 1 month of Skillshare for free. I think that's plenty of time to find out if a specific class is a good fit for you. You can try a few different ones. If there's something specific you want to learn in mind, you could for sure get through a good chunk of that class just in the trial period. So there you go. Thank you, Skillshare. Back to the table for more Take 5. Alrighty, what do I think the Take 5 is very, very good at? Well, the sound generation, I think, is identifiably Prophet. And it makes me want to do classic polysynth sounds with it. Brass pads, basses, things like that. And I won't show too many of them, but I recreated all the original Prophet 5 presets as a way to sort of appreciate that. And I won't go through too many of them. It feels a little self-indulgent. Even just with a little reverb. This one I like a lot. Dampening, high pass, less mix on both. More decay. Less pre-delay, more dampening. Love that one. Flutes. Anyway, those go on for a few banks. There's one in the last bank I actually decided I really wanted to show. What was that? Let me find it. Choir. Can you believe that was on the Pro 5? At least pretty close to it. Anyway, so many of those classic sounds are where I want to start. I don't want to use that in a final track or whatever, but I want to start there. You know what I mean? I want to just start with a simple brass. I want to start with just a simple pad. Right? And then maybe I'll change the oscillators. Maybe I'll move the filter around. Actually, I'll probably for sure move the filter around. But I also want to just click on the delay and the reverb. That to me is already pretty much a completed sound. And that's where a lot of my sound design has come from on the Take 5 here. I'm going to show you some of the sounds I've used for live shows. This is one I know I really like. And I'll do things like... Love it. A little bit of noise. I love that sound. Simple, chimey, but it's still kind of evocative. What other sounds? This is one of the presets that I've tweaked a little bit and use all the time. This is using the mod wheel to control the effect section set to the high pass. And if we peek in the mod matrix, we're also using the mod wheel to control the cutoff of our low pass filter. And between those two, you make a bandpass. Really enjoy that sound as well. Because I've talked so much about modulating the effect section, here's another sound I use live. It relies a lot on the tape effect, and Aftertouch is controlling the feedback. If I don't push very hard, pretty simple sound, right? If I push down pretty hard, feedback goes up. There's also some light modulation of it. And the mod wheel is on the time of that delay. So I might not do anything quite that extreme. But I will lay down pads like that, effects like that. And that totally is a combination of things that works well because of everything the Take 5 is. It has the effects that sound this way that you can modulate. The keyboard feels good and is responsive. The form factor, all those things. And even just... Love that one. I've got a few more in here. This is for a different group. Shout out the boys and Bouquet. This is just a good, very basic synthesizer sound. I have Bouquet's kind of post-rocky, so there's reverb and delay on all these. That one's big and bold. This is another sort of moving pad. If I push down on the aftertouch, and notice things getting a little brighter and a little busier. If I click in here, I'm directing noise to cutoff with the first modulation row, and pressure, wherever you are, is controlling the frequency of LFO2, and pressure is opening up the cutoff. Another basic sound, that one's pads. There you go. Lots of reverb on all those, actually, the ones I decided to show you. But I rely a lot on the effects, and I rely a lot on performance controls. If I'm going to be playing a keyboard live, I need to be able to, I need to be expressive. I need to be able to emote, I guess. I need to have control over something that I can perform. You know what I mean? Other than just playing the notes, there needs to be an element of feel. So velocity, aftertouch, the mod wheel, the effects, all things I utilize. And patches for that, for using live. And to segue into using the synthesizer live, I like the physical size of it. I like the layout of it. I think it makes a strong candidate to be the only synth somebody does have on stage. That's the way I've been using it, because I think it's small enough to be comfortably lifted. It fits in a backpack-shaped case, which is awesome, super convenient. Built-in effects means I don't need to bring a pedal or pedal board and worry about powering them. One less step to troubleshoot as well. And I think with that stuff, it kind of delivers on that super cheesy promo video they put out for the Take 5. They really emphasized that it's small and you can take it anywhere, which, by the way, the name is like a quadruple entendre, okay? I have no idea how many are intended, but there are 5 voices. You can take it anywhere. It takes inspiration from the Prophet 5. It literally takes the filter from the Prophet 5. 5 notes are taken away from a 4-octave keyboard. Here they are in the logo, which I do not think that one is real. You should take 5 seconds and click on subscribe. That one's not real. Okay, I wrote in here segue into how it fits in the market, but I literally didn't write down anything helpful for that. So all I'm actually going to do is cover up the cameras and transition to Facecam. Okay, where do I see this fitting in the current synth market? Sequential kind of wants us to see this as a beginner synth, which I think is a little out of line with where it's priced. I do think a lot of first-time synth buyers are not throwing down $1,300. I get that money's different for everybody, but when there's tons of stuff available for less than $500, you have to really know you're into your shit to throw around $1,000. That's my whole point. So the first 3/4 of the video are about the Take 5 on its own, what it is, what it can do well, its own merits. And I think that's an important part of making a purchase decision. If somebody watches that video and says, I don't want to work with the synth in that way, I'm not impressed with those features, I'm not impressed with that sound, then maybe that's all you need to know to make a decision, right? But for most people, we are buying one thing or another. Right? We're making this decision against the rest of the market. And that's why I think it's useful to compare to what else is available. And a lot of your guys' questions were about that, and I appreciate that because it helps me know what people are seeing as functional equivalents. And I think the most obvious thing to compare to first is a lot of the other sequential synthesizers, because there is a uniqueness to the Prophet and its lineage and the way people treat them and the way people see them. So I don't think it's wrong at all. I think it's quite obvious and very fair, in fact, to compare this to the other sequential synthesizers. If you want a Prophet, or you want a Prophet sound, what are you looking at? Sequential stuff. Anyway, used take prices right now are about $1,300, and I am not allowed to tell you the discount I got from Sequential. I cannot tell you how much I paid, but I can tell you that these used prices are not at all something I would be unwilling to pay. Cool? Cool. So the Prophet 8 Rev 2 is the closest comparison in a few ways. You can get 8 or 16 voices. You can get it in a module or a keyboard version. It has built-in effects and a mod matrix. All that stuff is pretty similar. Used prices for the module with 8 voices are about where the Take 5 are, right? But as soon as you get the keyboard version with 8, it's more, let alone the module or the keyboard version with 16 voices. It's about $1,900 was the last I can remember. Architecturally, I'm actually finding it kind of difficult to really line up what the Rev 2 is built around. It seems to be a newer version of the CEM 3396. CEM, or people will say Curtis chips, but CEM chips are filters and oscillators, but the 3396 is one of their entire synth on a chip. So I don't think that's bad. There's a lot of synth on a chip synthesizers. I like the Akai stuff. The 6-track, for example, an old sequential synth is the CEM 3394, which is same idea, a synth on a chip. That's a VCO and a VCF altogether. The 3396 and the recreation that is in the Prophet Rev 2 is a DCO and a filter that doesn't have any specific sequential lineage. Now, I don't think that's bad, and I don't think DCOs are bad. There's tons of DCO synths I really, really like, and there's not one good filter. I think there's tons of good sounding filters. So I'm not saying the architecture of the Rev 2 is worse, just that it's different, and let's understand how and why. The Take 5 has individual chip VCOs and individual chip filters, which are exactly what's in the Prophet 5. It's not good versus evil. It's not bad versus good. It's DCOs are not bad. VCOs are not inherently good. But the character of them is different, and the character of the filter is different. And I think the Take 5 in some ways is more inherently Prophet than the Rev 2. I don't know if that's blasphemous to say or not, but that doesn't mean they don't have shared DNA. It doesn't mean the choices available to you in the oscillators and the filters don't sound like a sequential circuit synthesizer. It just means that what I think of and what a lot of people think of as the Prophet sound is probably more prevalent in the Take 5 than it is in the Rev 2. Cool. I don't know if people are going to come for me or not. To decide between them, what would I recommend you look at? If the voice count is the most important thing to you, or you can only fit a module version, or you need the larger keybed, the Rev 2 makes sense. If the Take 5's panel, or you really care about the VCOs, which I don't think you should, or you really care about the Prophet 5 filter being exactly the same, or the form factor of the Take 5 makes more sense for you, then consider the Take 5. Okay, sound-wise, I think the Take 5 probably is closest to the Prophet 6. We have continuous waveform oscillators on both of them, but as a triangle on the Prophet 6 instead of a sine on the Take 5. The filter chip in the Prophet 6 is discrete components, again, like I just described, but they're recreating the SSM 2040. That is the same filter chip that the Take 5's modern SSI 2140 is based on. So they have a similar filter architecture totally at their base level. They both have built-in effects that are, if not the same, very, very similar. And we have one extra control of each of those on the Take 5. We have one less voice on the Take 5, of course. The biggest difference, I think, is modulation, the approach to modulation. The Take 5 uses the mod matrix for pretty much everything except for the envelopes. If you want to route any control signals other than that, and I guess there's FM on the panel as well, but other than that, you're in the mod matrix already. The Prophet 6 and the OB6 have somewhat limited modulation buses, so to speak, but all the destinations and the amounts are right on the panel. So you have less sources and less destinations on the Prophet 6, but getting to them is very, very immediate. And when you load up a new patch, it'll be more clear what's already set up. You'll see the switch, for example, illuminated for whatever modulations are already routed. I guess you only have one LFO on the Prophet 6 as well. Anyway, just because you can use Oscillator 2 as an LFO on the Prophet 6, but I digress. I could keep talking about these forever. The big difference is, in my eyes, the budget, first and foremost. If you can afford both of them, then you're the one who should consider comparing them to each other, right? Or if you really want a Prophet 6 and you can't afford it, then I think the Take 5 makes sense for you. It delivers on a lot of the same promises. But if you can afford both and you can consider both equally, then between them, I think it's super, super close. If you're more interested in the open-endedness at the cost of a little time of modulation on the Take 5, that's certainly worth considering. Or if the form factor fits for you, or if, quote unquote, the downsides don't seem to matter to you, or if the sort of simplicity of routing modulation or the immediacy of routing modulation on the Prophet 6 makes more sense to you, or you think that approach to modulation would lead you to more interesting sounds or more fitting synth sounds, then there you go, Prophet 6. And for the sake of completeness, I will mention the Prophet 5 reissue, $2,000 for the module, $3,000 for the keyboard version. If you want one, you know why you want one. You want a Prophet 5, right? It's not that you want anything else. But because the same filter's in there and enough of the other architecture is the same, and yes, I recreated all the patches, I think the Take 5 is a good way to get that sound, to get some of that vibe at a price that, we can afford. So compared to the other sequential stuff, like overall, I think it's a better fit for some people than a Rev 2. I think it's a less expensive way to a really similar promise as the Prophet 6, and with only a few downsides, and it's a way for, I guess, to get their hands on this Prophet 5 reissue filter. And to mention other analog polysynths on the market, the Korg Prologue, the 8-voice Korg Prologue, could be comparable. It gets splits and layers, which we don't have on the Take 5. It does not have a mod matrix, pretty limited modulation routing, so somewhat limited, especially in comparison modulation routing. It has built-in effects. You cannot modulate their parameters, which I sort of have really become reliant on after the DeepMind. So at least for my use case, I don't see them as functional equivalents. But if you just want classic bread and butter synth sounds, you can totally get there, and I think it would be cheaper. I think you could do maybe $900 for the 8-voice version, and if the voice count really is important to you. But while I'm talking Korg, the Minilog and the Minilog XD, they don't feel quite as premium, but they don't sound bad at all. I really, really like the original Minilog. I think the difference between 4 and 5 voices is actually quite large, at least to me, but those are still what I recommend as an actual first synthesizer. And same thing I said on the Prologue, no mod matrix, and the effects are not modulatable. But they have built-in sequencers and arpeggiators and things like that as well. The DeepMind 12, something I know very, very well. It's sort of how this channel started. Good mod matrix, good built-in effects, albeit fewer rows on the modulation, and more complicated effects than you have on the Take 5. Only has one oscillator. It's like a Juno-style DCO. Just saw in square. You do have a sub-oscillator, which is just a square, but very flexible. Yes, there are tricks to double the voices. It really is just a workaround. But yes, there's good built-in effects that can be modulated. It certainly feels less premium, like I said again. One of the reasons I've stopped using mine, there's a constant ground hum that I've started to find really, really annoying, especially when I'm editing and I just hear it the entire time. I just can't deal with it anymore. Anyway, that's everything I outlined, but there are certainly digital options if you don't care if it's analog, right? If all the form factor and interface stuff is all what's really, really important to you, and if it's analog or not, doesn't matter. The Hydrosynth and all its derivatives, and the modal stuff, the Cobalt and the Argon. Cobalt specifically is virtual analog, so closer core sound to an actual, subtractive analog. Definitely worth considering as well. And if you want analog, and I do value that, it's something that's fun and exciting to me. Not that I'm exclusively analog or I only like analog, but there's elements of it that I find very, very exciting. Then, maybe those aren't equivalents to you, but I digress. So let's conclude with where I started, right? I'll ask again, why aren't these everywhere? I think, and this is a lot of conjecture, but I think being priced lower than the other sequential stuff makes people see it as worse or lesser. And, assuming that it must have cut some corners to reach this price point. I really don't think that's the case. It sounds great, and it's really, really flexible, and the things that make it cheaper are a slightly smaller keybed. It's still a FTAR keybed. It's still a nice keybed. And the fact that the envelopes are digital instead of analog, which I think is an improvement. And same thing with the LFOs. I think digital LFOs and digital envelopes are better. And it has the same, if not very similar, effect section to the Prophet 6 and the OB6. And it really makes you wonder, where is the cost saving? And it doesn't feel like any corners are really cut. Other than maybe marketing, they're less excited to put this out than they are, these big sort of vintage-inspired things. But it shares very clearly a lot of Prophet DNA, and it does have uniqueness to it that makes it its own. And I think, again, conjecture, maybe it being more expensive than what the public at large would consider to be a beginner synth, combined with Sequential marketing it in a lot of ways as, a beginner synth or your first synth, has people comparing it to the wrong market. We are comparing this to the Minilog and the Minilog XD when we shouldn't. We should be comparing this to the Prophet 6. You know what I mean? I do not see this as a low-cost instrument. I do not see this as something a beginner would be interested in. This, to me, is certainly a premium product for people who want something that sounds and feels professional. And there's so much more. I guess when I sit at it, I feel more Prologue than I do Minilog. Again, there's a lot of conjecture, but maybe the lukewarm reception pretty early on of some high-caliber creators was magnified. The first thing people heard about this new sequential synth was so-and-so didn't like the timbre inherently, and I think that's a huge shame. I think there's so much more value and so much more to evaluate in an individual synthesizer than its inherent tone, and I think that's actually one of the only things that's quite easy to overcome. If you think it's lacking in some certain section of EQ, compensate for that somewhere in the drive, with your patching, with the filter, with your mixer, in EQ and recording. Beyond me disagreeing with it, that's an issue that can totally be compensated for, that can totally be overcome. And if everything else about a synthesizer is a fit for you, and you ignore it because of one comment made during someone else's first impressions, then, I think that's a huge shame. Anyway, I think a lot of people have dismissed the Take 5 for some combination of these reasons, and if you ask me, they're really, really missing out. I really love the Take 5. I'm happy to have it. I'm going to continue to use it as my on-stage keyboard and for general 2-oscillator sound design. That's all I've got. My name's Jorb. I love gear. That includes Take 5. Certainly, appreciate you watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Cheers and so long.